Well, hey, I'm Dammit, and this is my report for the ceremony that I conducted on Christmas, December 25th, 2020. I'm just going to be speaking off the cuff. I've got some notes. Didn't write anything up formally. It was epic. It was one of the best nights I've ever had doing this stuff, which isn't to say it was easy. There were parts of it that were absolutely terrible. So if you've been following me at all, you know that I talk a lot about some experiences I had back in the summer of 2017, when I guess the best way to describe it is an archetype was activated in my unconscious, the prophet archetype. I started having these visions, which gave me plans for a religion of the future. And along with those plans came an undeniable instruction to make it happen and get people involved and show people how to do this stuff. This whole approach that I've been developing, and this idea of entheatainment, this sacred theatrical thing that's sort of modeled on a nightclub experience, like a new way to worship together, a new way to have a direct apprehension of the sacred together. And I try to joke about that. That's a weird thing to be carrying around in your head, this idea that like you have been called by God to do certain work. Part of you just wants to have nothing to do with it. But part of you is like, I cannot deny that these things are happening, or I'm seeing these things, or having these amazing experiences. So I need to do something with it. And part of the way that I try to cope with it is I try to be self-mocking about it. You know, I refer to myself as a cult leader. I'm a cult leader. It's called the First Church of David Bowie.
No way, really? Yeah. How many members do you have?
I don't know, just like 4 or 5 at this point.
Oh.
But it doesn't take away from the fact that I'm embroiled in a real spiritual adventure. And the thing about adventures, of course, is that they're often not very comfortable. They're often really scary and awful, and you don't want to be doing it at all. You want to be home safe again, you know? So this past summer, I came up against something really, truly terrible. I had to quit 3 ceremonies in a row because I kept hitting this roadblock of nausea and terror, and basically just having straight up panic attacks right in the middle of, on big doses of psychedelics, which is not anybody's recipe for a good time. And there were always these associated images that I would see these things superimposed on my visionary field of like vermin and flies, and there was all this other stuff. And there's a force in the universe that tries to defeat human creativity. The writer Stephen Pressfield calls it resistance, and he equates it with the devil. He basically, the idea of Satan and the guy with the horns and the pitchfork and the tail and the whole bit. That's a mythologized image for this force that people around the world and throughout all time have recognized, right? It's the thing that makes things go wrong, and it's the thing that like makes weird psychopathic thoughts pop into your head at odd intervals. And the model for reality that I've come to adopt is that it's sort of like an idea of a simulation hypothesis, but it's a little bit more. It gives you a little more agency. You're not a simulation. You're a player in a game space. That this reality that we live in is a game space for a higher order civilization where they can insert themselves to learn moral lessons and shed karmic weight. It's kind of like a karmic fat farm. And built into that is this resistance that's there to defeat our aspirations to become the best version of ourselves. And so when I was having these visions of flies and rats and cockroaches and shit, I realized like, this is the devil, straight up. This oppressive sense of terror, this thing that's trying to tear me down and drive me into despair and madness, this is the devil trying to stop me from doing this work. And when you find yourself kind of living The Exorcist, it's not something you really want to get involved with. You realize like, oh, I'm really putting my mental health on the line here. Like, or even I was afraid, I was basically suicidal this summer. Like the impact of these experiences was so dreadful that I was crawling out of my skin. And it took me a few months and a lot of intensive self-work in order to get back to the point where I could even consider doing this kind of work again, this deep visionary work, and exposing myself to that, because I just didn't know if I was going to get past it, and I didn't know what the price might be for failure. But I screwed my courage to the sticking place, and I got started again, and I've been on the comeback trail ever since. So on Friday, I worked with, I worked with 4 grams of cubensis, which is not a lot for me, but for the first time in 6 months, I combined it with a 3-gram water extract of Syrian rue. And if you know anything about this stuff, the combination of those is sometimes referred to as Silawaska. And the Syrian rue effectively doubles, maybe 1.5 to doubles the dose of mushrooms that you're working with. So basically I was on 6 to 8 grams of mushrooms plus 3 hits of pot, 4 by the end, and hape, which is a tobacco blend from South America that contains various psychoactive ingredients. I was able to handle it just fine. In fact, I've never been more lucid. I'll probably cut in some footage from the ceremony into this video so you can see what I'm talking about. The idea is that you can be on these really big doses and be really, really stoned, but also be as sober as I am right now, and totally in control 100% of yourself. It takes a lot of practice, but that's the way forward with this stuff. This is I believe it represents a skillful usage of psychedelics. I'm sure there are other people who have gotten to this point, but I haven't seen anybody else talking about it as candidly as I have, and I haven't seen anybody else laying out a method to get to that point. And then, okay, so that's all established. Now, another part of that is the resistance has always been part of this from the beginning, but I also had a clear sense that I was being protected from on high. How could I not be as one of God's prophets? And this goes all the way back to some ayahuasca work I did several years ago, where I had a vision of the Archangel Michael. And throughout my experimentation with this stuff, as I've said a few times, like I've done this a lot. I've kind of lost count now, but I'm somewhere in the 90s for having done these ceremonies. And there was always a sense that there was something looking out for me, making sure that I didn't get in over my head, or if I did, a couple times I was in real trouble, and then something would just come swooping in out of nowhere and kind of save the day. But that's all gone now. And I believe that it's because this is sort of the next stage of my development. If you've ever done any kind of boxing or kickboxing, early on, when you fight with headgear and shin pads and big, thick, heavy gloves, 16-ounce gloves. But later when you go pro, you got a mouth guard and 10-ounce gloves, and that's it. Because that's the added risk, that's the added excitement, that's the real test. And so for me now, there's no more guardrails. It's the success or failure of my evening depends entirely on me and my self-control and my approach to this stuff. And so this time out, I came in with some trepidation, but right off the bat, I had a feeling that this was going to be a little bit different. Even before the ceremony began, and just in the 20 minutes that I was between my ingestion of the substantia and when I first felt the first effects, I started just feeling these waves of gratitude towards the Holy Ma, towards the goddess. And it was amazing how there was no anxiety at all coming on. I simply thinking of her and talking to her, speaking to her out loud, just as to a person. It's like you're talking to an imaginary friend. But the most important thing is that in that conversation, you are generating emotion, positive emotion. As long as you're doing that, there's no room for the anxiety. And throughout the course of the evening, that was my tactic. I have a note here that says, the trick is to stay ahead of it by talking to this person you love, staying centered in gratitude and thanks for what they mean to you, and just speak. Feel your feelings and speak them. And it was amazing the difference that it created in my visionary space. A lot of this stuff, shamanism and whatnot, is about seeing. And it's about determining how things are going and what you're interacting with by what you see when your eyes are closed. When you are encountering some kind of negative energy or negative presence, you will see things that are ugly and distorted. And when you are encountering benevolent presences, you will see things that are coherent and beautiful. And the idea is to stay oriented on that. Because when you allow yourself to get distracted by the ugly, or you let it weird you out and you start to get disturbed, that can become like a feedback loop, and you'll start to spiral down, and before you know it, you're in bad Tripistan, right? And you're having a terrible time. And at that point, when you really get in a hole, it gets difficult to dig yourself out. So you have to stay ahead of it. And really, it's just about staying upbeat, about maintaining that kind of control over your emotions, which is easier said than done, especially under the influence of a large dose of psychedelics. But it can be done. It can. And it gets better with practice. All right. I guess I want to speak a little bit about sort of the content of my visions for the evening. And so, of course, the idea is, so I'm making these instructional videos about the Phonomantic Rite. And the Phonomantic Rite is effectively a playlist of songs that are meant to take you through emotional states in a certain sequence. And there's a structure to it. There's basically like an introduction, and an invocation and a processional. So there's a build, and then there's three main workings. There's a rite of transformation that's all really rock and really masculine, and a rite of purification, which is all really pop and dancey and very feminine, and then a rite of atonement, which is all about Anne Frank and uses songs by this band Neutral Milk Hotel. What I do over the course of the evening when I'm working here by myself is I'm just sitting in front of my computer watching the music videos that I've put together for this stuff, because the music videos can help condition the experience. The images in the videos sort of shape the aesthetic moment, shape the emotion that you're trying to experience. And when you start to spiral out or get distracted or resistance starts to come in really strong, you just focus on the images in the video and it'll help carry you through. Usually when things start to first get really strong, it's during a song called Moon Age Daydream by David Bowie, and this is usually about 45 minutes into the ceremony. At this point, the substantia has fully come on, and I've taken my first hit of pot, and that's really what sort of like turbo boosts things quite a bit. And in this, at the end of Moon Age Daydream, I often get these tremendous sensations of energy passing through my body, and I almost feel like my eyes will roll back into my head, and my arms will just start floating up, and I feel like I'm floating in space and weightless. On Friday, what I saw were these remarkable, it was layer upon layer upon layer of images, which makes it sort of difficult to really describe. But they were, and the reason I have notes is when the song is over, I turn immediately to the camera and I describe what it is that I just saw as lucidly as I can, and then I go back to work again. And so I saw these elaborate sci-fi pantheons of Hindu deities. They were, multi-armed and had a lot of the sort of traditional iconography of them, but they very definitely had like a technological edge to them. And then most importantly, superimposed over that, I saw a feminine face and eyes like staring right back at me. It's hard to overstate the impact of seeing things like that, when these spontaneous things, you're seeing this and it's like, it's so vivid in your mind's eye that you might as well be seeing it with your eyes open. And you just realize like, holy shit, this is real. This is actually happening in this moment. It's one thing to be in this space now talking about this. This is like, I can talk about the goddess and these things and I believe it, I do. But it's also like talking about a dream, but in that moment, it's actually literally happening. You are encountering something that is beyond human, and you really have to, it'll put you back on your heels. This idea of, oh my God, you can call on the goddess and get a response. This is it really is actual. And that's the first step of leaving what I call, what I refer to as Maya, that Hindu idea of illusion, which is how I refer to our everyday mundane reality, and entering into belief space, which is where you are in a reality where God is real and spirits are real, and you can see into the afterlife, which is the whole point of this stuff. And these ceremonies are always about the struggle to get there. And I always counted on being delivered. Like the early parts could be agony, because it would just be me and regular mundane me suffering under this huge psychic load, all this stress and tension of carrying this huge, just tripping balls, and usually like really, really like anxious, verging on terror. And now I'm starting to learn that the power of my own belief is what can carry me into those spaces, that the responsibility is really on me. What I think I understand now is that the only way to get through this at this level is by being fixated in gratitude on her and believing in her constantly as the goddess and talking to her and relying on that, because there's no more guardrails, there's no more protection. Belief is the only refuge for me at this point. But that means that it's also up to me, and I can count on myself, and I can count on train. That means if I can do it well at one stage, that means I can train at it and get better at it, and I'm not counting on any other thing to bring me there. And so that's a pretty exciting development. I've been reading this book called The Immortality Key, which attempts to connect the mysteries of Eleusis with later the Dionysian revels and the early Christian church, because they all used some kind of wine as a sacrament. And at Eleusis, it was referred to as kykeon, and it hasn't really been completely archaeologically proven yet, but a lot of people are theorizing that this wine contains some kind of hallucinogenic agent in it, whether it was ergot or whatever. And so did the Dionysian revels, and then so did the early Christian church, that the Eucharist that Christ celebrated was actually a psychedelic wine, which is a fun thought. That basically what the church serves now as a Eucharist is just a placebo. It doesn't actually do anything, as we all know, whereas in the old days, when it really first started, they would take this thing and they would actually see God. And they would do it in a group, and the way that they did it was they had parties. They would get together and drink and dance and sing and get wild. And that's the thing. When you get wild, so I have this note here is, the trick is have a good time, defend the good time at all costs, celebrate, get wild. That's what people have always done with this stuff. They got together, they had parties, and that celebration will draw in. You feel spirit, you get enthused, and if you're lucky, it'll catch fire and become divine. That's how it works. You have to be there feeling this certain way, getting this emotion going, and then it'll quicken. And then you'll make a connection to spirit, and that's when your visionary experience will take off, and the next thing you know, you are having an encounter with the deity. And it's not just a matter of what you're seeing. That's kind of beside the point. It's how you're feeling. And it's the feeling that drives the vision. And it's the feeling that gives it meaning. Freaking out in your heart because you're having this experience of the numinous, and it's so profound and so magic. And then that's what you're left with afterwards. You come out of that state, but yet somehow being in touch with that energy, it changes you. It changes you for the better. The stereo myth is always hard. It's always hard. There's always a lot of anxiety. And that's why I constructed it the way I did with a lot of heavy rock music and stuff, because the aggression of the music helps me get through that. And the song Blood and Thunder by Mastodon is supposed to map onto the ordeal stage of the hero's journey. And you're basically raising the power of Satan. I'll talk at length about why that's a good idea later. But this was resistance really came in against me and really tried to get me to quit. It was making things extremely unpleasant for me. And it's the thing is you have this weight on you that's trying to drag you down, like you're not having fun at all. This doesn't sound good. This is stupid. This is pointless. Give this up. And you simply cannot give into that. So you have to find other ways. You have to find things to feel good about. And I've been working really hard on my singing, and it's improving, but I'm far from a pro, but it's giving me I'm much better able to appreciate what people are pulling off at a technical level when I listen to music. So listening to the guys at Mastodon sing that song, and the guy, Neil Fallon, I think his name is, the singer from Clutch, who sings the chorus in that song, like listening to his, I guess it's not the chorus, it's it would be the C section, right? The bridge. Listening to what he does with his voice was so astonishing in that state that it kind of kept me distracted. But then all of a sudden in my visionary space, I got these really clear images of blood splattering. It was almost like my eyes were closed, and I'm looking at whatever I forget what it was that I was kind of seeing in the psychedelic space, but then superimposed on it, like blood splattering on glass were these red streaks that would then run. It was photorealistic. It was amazing. And I was like, I think resistance is pissed. But I was also able to, that's the thing. One of the cool things about getting really adept with working with psychedelics is you can basically have parallel streams of thought and be able to do two things at once, This actually came up a little bit earlier in the song 46 and 2, where I was feeling uncanny dread because of that song, but also feeling intense gratitude to the Holy Ma at the same time. And I was aware that I'm holding these two emotional pitches at the same time, and they're like in harmony with each other. They're both really ringing out really distinctly. I really am feeling this dread, but I'm also feeling gratitude because I'm experiencing this dread as an aesthetic emotion. So I'm both sort of like doing the work of like feeling satanic rage, but also feeling this kind of like boyish glee and wonder at just the sheer craziness of seeing blood splattering across my visionary space. And then giving thanks to the Holy Ma for how amazing that whole experience was. And then when it was over, and this is what I mean about like your visionary space sort of telling you what you're up against, I suddenly had a very clear vision of a guy who sort of dressed up like a Delta Force operator or a militiaman, like in camo pants and like one of those tan tactical jerseys. And he was packing guns into the back of an SUV and it's like slamming the hatch and stuff. I had this impression of like, oh, these guys are pissed. And they're moving out, they're coming for me. And I was like, I guess the rest of the night's gonna be pretty entertaining. In 3 Days, the Jane's Addiction song, I had another really spectacular experience. It turns out that this is having been reading this book about these ancient mystery religions, I really tried to, and having long sort of connected what I'm doing with this idea of the horned god and some of these more archaic, I really think that what is happening is that I'm getting what's emerging from the unconscious for me is kind of a modern update of these mystery religions like Eleusis. Eleusis was this thing where people would go into these underground caverns and apparently see some kind of theatrical spectacle that would give them a vision of God. And that's what entheatainment is aspiring to be, right? That's what I'm sort of planning and trying to work out how to do here and now using electronic music and lights and costumes and all the stuff that we have. Excuse me, I should say electronic amplification, because it's definitely not EDM or anything I'm using. It's rock music and dance music and stuff, funk music. But during the big build-up to the erotic Jesus moment in 3 days, I was actively invoking the Horned One, and I started to see in my visionary space. And this is, again, one of those things that just is so convincing that I'm really onto something, like something is really happening here. I started to see these glyphs and symbols in glowing green suddenly appear. They were obviously occult symbols. They were obviously some sort of language and like a name or something. Not anything I've ever seen before, not anything I really expected to see. And seeing it so vividly, and the fact that it emerged in response to my invocation and seemed to be like coming in on me, like and sort of like joining within my consciousness, it's kind of gobsmacking, It was a lot of fun. Okay, and then so now we get to basically like what was I think probably the highlight of the night. In the Boston song, "Don't Look Back," it started really flat. Like I was getting the feeling that the mushrooms are more or less worn off, even though I was so early in the night, like not even like 90 minutes in. Just wasn't seeing anything, and consequently, I wasn't really feeling anything. And when you don't feel any positive emotion, when you don't feel positive emotion, you start to slide, or you start to get a little, not disgruntled exactly, but a little bemused, which leads to feeling a little bit of a little anxiety, which starts to be dread, which starts to be terror. It's a slippery slope. So rather than getting into that, I really just tried to listen. And I say here, instead I paid attention to the sheer wizardry of the song, that singing in those guitars. I resonated with that, and then followed that into really feeling their intention. Like Brad Delp singing, "Everything in my life is leading me on," the good-hearted intensity he put into belting those notes. And then I imagined that I was absorbing that sort of motivational, noble energy by listening to the song. And I was feeling it. And that's the whole sort of point of it, right? And then all of a sudden, my visionary space opened up, and I really intensely, to DMT levels. And all of a sudden I was seeing cities of the future. I was on I was in a car, like a little two-seater, and we were going over a bridge, maybe the Golden Gate Bridge, into like this science fictional city of the future, and I could see myself in the driver's seat, and I was outlined in red, sort of like highlighted, like like a selected player in a video game or something. And the implicit message was, here's the future you hope to see. We're creating it now, in this moment of working together and doing this stuff. And then I watched myself sort of speed off, and the scene resolved into these spiraling architectures of energy. They were just incredibly bright in 3D. If you want to imagine sort of like, if you've seen some of these images of DMT space where it's sort of like these tentacle arms all swirling over each other and stuff, but imagine those made of like brightly shining, engineered machine parts. They became ribbons of structures encircling the Earth around the equator. It was a gorgeous and orbital city. And then suddenly it was gone. It was so vivid. And then it was gone again. And then because resistance came surging back, and everything became really flat and monochromatic and sort of dreadful again. And I was so startled and sort of like what the fuck? And resistance was able to capitalize on that. See, that's the thing. Resistance comes at you wherever you are vulnerable. Whenever you are feeling like any kind of negative emotion, it's like it's a wrestler, and all of a sudden it gets leverage there, and it'll start to pry at you there and try to break you. But I just kept listening to the song and really feeling it. And this time the resistance passed away faster. And the whole thing became this incredible celestial celebration. And I emerged from it just absolutely glowing with energy and just so grateful for everything. I want to reiterate how productive it was to invoke various gods at various points. The stereo myth ends with Common People by Pulp, which is this big rave up. And one of the most productive things that came up during the evening was really imagining myself like in a group ceremony context, like imagining myself on stage doing the rite, and then right up front were as the lead phonomancer. And then right in front of me in the dance floor, right in front of the stage, are my rhythm phonomancers, who are my friends and teammates, who know all the songs, and we've worked out all kinds of harmonies, and we often do dance steps together, and like we're in the space together. We support each other through this, and we're just ripping it up to this song. And I invited Dionysus, who of course is the god of ecstasy and wild revels. And when I did so, the things that I saw in my head, you don't really have the vocabulary for them. It's like seeing an alien entity, and for just brief glimpses of seconds at a time, and even more so like seeing them in dreams. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. So it's difficult. You come back, sometimes you don't really know what it is that you saw, except that it was extremely impressive. And then at the end of the song, there was the clearest message, like, this is the will of God, the true will. You are acting in accordance with the true will. And I don't go looking for that kind of affirmation, but man, when I get it, I sure am grateful for it. And so back in the everyday world now, I have to think critically about it. You can't simply accept it, and because that's when you get sort of inflated, right? You what the Jungians call ego inflation. You become too identified with the archetype. And Jung himself really emphasized that you have to maintain a critical stance with the unconscious. You can't simply accept everything it tells you unquestioningly. So belief becomes a question of will and decision. And is it for the good? For you and for everybody, And that's an ongoing discussion. But I have to say that my life is so much better. I'm thriving under these really restrictive circumstances. I live in a place where I don't really know anybody. I really have like one friend, one close friend from long ago, and then a couple of friendly acquaintances, and certainly like no dates or anything like that. It's been one of the loneliest years of my life. Not to mention the fact that I'm doing this and talking about this. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to know. So by persisting in doing this, I'm basically completely alienating myself from my culture. And yet I don't think I've ever been happier. I don't think I've ever been more sort of settled in myself and more productive and more creative. It's a game of make-believe, and yet it could yield real-world results. If I keep doing the things that I'm doing, if I keep pushing on these creative projects I'm doing, maybe something could work out. Maybe it could have an impact. And the best part about the myth that's kind of evolved around it is that even if as the years go by and I'm still completely ignored, I can just tell myself that these videos are going to be discovered after I'm dead. They're going to live forever on YouTube, and somebody somewhere down the line might stumble across them and find their interest piqued, and then try this work. Try using the Phonomantic Rite, these movies that I've made, and use them to condition a psychedelic experience and have a fucking mind-blowing experience of the sacred, and realize, like, I'm not kidding about any of this, and it really does work. And then they can pick up the baton and then carry it forward from there. And then my job will be done. All right, there's one more thing I want to talk about, which is during the song Chandelier, I again evoked a goddess. But the thing is, you don't always have to use real goddesses. The gods are just images of these sort of energetic currents in the universe, right? Which is, in the way I've come to understand it, is emotion is energy, is spirit. And certain very powerful emotions are sort of like romantic rejection and heartbreak connect to the collective experience of that emotion, and ultimately connect to the divine itself. And so if working with a song like Chandelier, which is all about this sort of like romanticizing self-destruction and the sort of beauty of the horrid glory of like throwing your life away, I invoked a goddess. And I named her Distressa. And goddamn, if it didn't, in doing that, if it didn't really vastly deepen that experience. But what I want to talk about is about this idea of how you perceive in visionary space. There's basically two ways that you see with your eyes closed. One is just the fractals and the bright lights and all the things that kind of go with the psychedelic kaleidoscope that you'll see, especially on high doses or on ayahuasca or DMT and stuff, right? But then there's also the waking dreams that you enter, where you're basically the stuff that you're seeing is it's like a dream in the sense that it's mostly happening in your unconscious, and you're kind of only marginally aware of it. And that's why it's so difficult to remember dreams, because that's when you come into waking consciousness again, it's no longer accessible in the same way. But I work on this a lot as part of my meditative practice. I sit there with my eyes closed, and I simply look. And the reason is that space is where your visions arise from. This is might be too much to go into now, but basically when you close your eyes, right, you see just basically the swirls of color, right? But then out of that, when you start to trip, images will start to arise out of that. It's kind of like one of those games you could get at the novelty store with 1,000 pins under a glass plate, and you push your hand up and it raises an impression to the hand. Like, these things arise from that in that space, and then eventually you realize, like, oh, you're not just looking at your back of your eyelids, you're actually seeing into your brain, into your consciousness, And at a certain point, in certain points during that particular song, I remember very clearly like seeing that, but then also to the side, like seeing the sort of, and that tends to be very abstract. And then the things that you see with your dreaming mind, your unconscious mind, tend to be like, they're like dreams. They look like shapes and reality, representations of our reality. And I was seeing them side by side. Like that dream was in the periphery of my vision. I really worked hard to bring those together. And that's where you want to get. And it's easier to do on DMT-based psychedelics, to be able to look straight at it and see it. And I think this is really analogous to the experience of lucid dreaming. I think in lucid dreaming, what happens is that the information that's generated by the dreaming parts of your mind somehow gets routed through your optic nerve, so you're experiencing it like you're actually conscious. If you ever had an experience of lucid dreaming and you're looking around like, this is exactly like the real world. Like, what is this? How can this be happening? But that can happen in the psychedelic space too. And it gets better with practice. And I think that is sort of the goal here is training in meditation all the time to get to the point where in the visionary space, you can actually look at it consciously and see it like you were there at will. And then I think that's really gonna be the next step in development. All right, got 2 more things. Sorry, this is so long. One was realizing during the recitation of the Gnostic prayer, Thunder Perfect Mind, that you can, in the medicine state, you can actually hear it as God herself speaking those words, which is impressive, to say the least. Again, it's all in how you experience it, and it's all in consciously choosing to believe that that's what's happening. You know, and when you make that choice to believe that that's what's happening, it transforms the experience. It makes it way, way more emotional, and then consequently what you're seeing in your head becomes so much more impressive. So that's kind of like a feedback loop. And then the last thing I want to talk about is during the recessional song, Beauty and Falling Leaves by Yob, I had this beautiful vision of a way to do that as a group with other people, where we would, I saw my crew, my rhythm phonomancers and me, and this is after the show, and we're all just on the dance floor, and this massive, gorgeous metal song is playing, right? And when it comes to the chorus, we're all singing along at the top of our lungs, and we're making the devil horns, and we're sort of like standing there in a circle, like rocking back and forth with our, you know, with our hands pronated towards us. And in the center of our group is one person who is having some kind of problem in their life. They need some kind of healing. And then the second half of each chorus where they sing, your voice, your heart brings me home, we all we supinate our hands. So we're focusing that energy. We're singing to the goddess, like your heart brings me home, is I believe what the lyric is. And by focusing it like this and singing to the center of the circle, we're singing to the goddess incarnated in that person. And so they receive that energy that we're giving to them, and hopefully they experience themselves as the goddess in that moment. I really hope I get to do this someday. It could be so amazing. But of course the difficulty is, you know, how many people really have the kind of eclectic taste in music that I do? To be so conversant and really enjoy such a wide range of pop and rock and indie and metal and Bulgarian choir music is kind of a lot to ask for, but I'm really hoping that at some point I'll have the resources where I can just hire people and require them to learn these songs, to be part of it, to have my team, to make this a real theatrical production, and have the real support that I need. I know, among other things, like when I encounter resistance, if I had somebody right there with me who's been through it too, and in that moment is not, but sees me going through it and be like, hey, you totally got this. You've got this. And it would be such a help. And that's why people get together to do anything. It amplifies experiences, right? But more importantly, people take refuge in communities of belief, because when things get rough, you need to be around other people who really believe what you believe, or what you are faltering in your belief in, and they remind you what you're really about. And they reassure you that it's all real, they're experiencing it, and that you can come back and be in the same place they are right now. All right, that was my Christmas celebration. And the best sign of all was at the end of it, I still had energy to burn, and I have a few songs that I traditionally use to close out the space. I can't remember the last time I had the energy to get up and dance to them, let alone like feel good and have a blast doing it. And this time I did. And I could not be more grateful for everything, all the terrible shit that went down this summer, and all the fear and the loneliness that I've suffered over the last few years to get me to this place. So I just want to say, thanks, Ma. I love you. And I love you guys too. And I hope that I'll hear from some of you guys. If you want to email me, it's pod.dammit@gmail.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And if you want to try this stuff out, I'll try to help you get started. All right, take care. I'll see you next time.
I'm an alligator. I'm a mama, papa coming for you.